Acknowledgement.
If you give me a second, I could pull it up.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it or put it in the chat?
If you could, I think that, I think it's doesn't require someone here to read it as long as we read it before we start the meeting.
Okay. So a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and the land. I acknowledge that we live and work on the unceded land of the Dena'ina Athabascan people and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of the land on which we live.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So, yeah, we're getting started on the Budget Advisory Committee meeting for February 8th, 2024. And yes, we can start now that we've had the land acknowledgement, start with the roll call.
Chair Nolan Clouda. Vice Chair Al Tavani. Brian Flynn.
Present.
Matthew Harvey.
Present.
Robert Helzer.
Present.
Lindsay Hobson.
Present.
Mark Lucan.
Present.
Carla McConnell.
Present.
Jared Riedel. Rachel Reese. And Carmela Warfield.
Present.
You have the floor.
Okay, and we have a quorum. All right. We have agenda, or hopefully you have an agenda in front of you. Do I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
Mr. Chair, motion to approve the agenda. This is Carmela.
Okay. Second?
Second, this is Carla.
Thank you. All right, we have an approved agenda. All right. Well, sorry about that. It's not supposed to happen. Okay. Well, let's start with informational reports, and the chair is not here, so I guess we'll move to assembly report.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Anna Brawley on the Assembly. I'm happy to be here this month. I will give just a couple brief updates and then I can answer questions. And then I'm actually interested in this presentation from Ross Griswold. So I'll speak briefly about what I know about the bonds, but I will leave any detailed questions to him. I know he'll be here soon. So let's see, we had a big meeting in January. So for those who've been tracking things that go on the ballot or our budget in general. So the last meeting in January is when we have to finalize any items that go for the ballot. And I'll clarify that does not mean candidates, because that's not something the Assembly deals with directly. That's with the clerk's office, folks who are filing all those details. I'm talking about things like bonds, charter amendments, anything that's put forward to voters as an issue, a ballot proposition. So we finalized all of the bonds that will appear on the ballot. We can follow up with a detailed list, but I think Sharon could also provide that. Essentially, we have a Parks and Recreation bond, a road service bond for the main Anchorage road service area. We have, let's see, school bond, and I'll defer to the school district folks to answer questions about that. And public transit bond and safety. There was one for some improvements to the fire station. I can, we can provide a full list. But some of the usual bonds that you see, and then a couple new ones to be aware of. One is the CASA bond, so Chugach area, Chugach Access Service Area. That was something, a new service area created last year through voter approval. This will be the first year that any capital projects move through that. But essentially, it's not the full area of Anchorage, the municipality, but it's a subset like most service areas are. That would improve access to Chugach State Park. So not projects within the park boundaries, because that's state purview, but things like improving access to Flat Top, for example, Canyon Road, things like that. So there was multiple projects put forward. There's one that's actually included in the bond this year for $4 million, and I think it's Upper Canyon Road / Sunnyside. It's the backside of Flat Top, an area that if you've been up there is challenging for neighbors and for anybody trying to access that area. But it's really one of what will hopefully be many projects over the years to, again, improve municipal access to the park, because that's been a long time discussion. Another one that you'll see on the ballot is an area-wide cemetery bond. So again, last year, I believe we created a cemetery service area. That one is area-wide all the way from up in Chugiak Eagle River down to Girdwood. And the idea is to be able to pay for cemetery improvements. So right now we have the Anchorage Memorial Park, the cemetery downtown, but there's also been movement over the years to create a new cemetery in Girdwood and then another one in Eagle River. And so the idea with those is not that those are only for those communities, but really for anybody. Let's say I pass away, whatever, hopefully many years in the future, maybe I want to get buried in Girdwood. That would be an option for me as an Anchorage resident, and of course for local residents as well. So so that is not funding to fully create those projects, but I believe it's 4.1 million for moving those projects forward, as well as a small amount for replacing some equipment at the Anchorage Memorial Cemetery, which in the past would have been on our parks bond, but now because of this cemetery service area is part of that new piece. And then, of course, the other thing that you'll see on the ballot is the public restrooms bond. And so that one is not part of the parks bond. It's not part of the other larger bonds. It's something that myself and Chair Constant and Vice Chair Zalatel co-sponsored, put forward this fall. And so that again is $5 million total. It is for up to or at least 10 public restrooms. We've been describing them as the Portland Loo style, portable, not portable in the sense that they would be like a movable, but standalone, could be relocated at another time, hooked up to water and sewer, and then would be placed in different locations throughout the municipality. And the cost of those, I know there's been a lot of confusion about that. The cost is not only purchasing, it's also installation, including connecting to water and sewer, and then actually financing the life of, or at least the 15 to 20 years, the life of the bond, financing the regular maintenance of those. So the staff time that it takes to clean them, money for minor repairs like repairing a door hinge, things like that. So I've been using the metaphor. It's like when you buy a car, you weren't only paying for the car, but you also financed in, your 10 or 15 years of oil changes and tire changes and kind of that routine stuff. So that's the idea with those. So we finalized those pieces, and so those will be moving forward on the bond. And of course, because they are finalized for the ballot, I am free to advocate for them or against them. I'm personally for them, so I'm not going to advocate against. But also, we are not allowed to use municipal resources to advocate for them at this point. So what you'll see from the city is really information, what they are for, what the details are. And so just to be clear, there might be folks doing campaigns outside of the municipal sphere, but you'll really just see information from the muni at this point. So the bonds, that was a big one. And then I'll just give a preview coming up for in a couple months from now, we will take up the other part of the budget, which is the first quarter budget revision. So that has multiple parts. It includes finalizing the mill rate for our property taxes, because we also, the step that's already been completed is doing property valuations. And then, so we need to look at what our budget's going to be, property valuations, updating revenue projections for things like our bed tax or gas tax, the other pieces of our revenue sources, and then really finalizing that, as well as potentially making additional appropriations. So, so the passing of the budget in November, finalizing in November and December was step one. This is step two for the FY24 budget. So we'll come back to that, I'm sure, later, but just to give you guys a heads up, that's where we're headed. And the last thing I'll say is we had a work session. I don't remember what day it was, but it was last month in January with Jack Adamus, our municipal assessor, and really walked through not just what our current property valuations are, but really a good detail on how that's done, considerations. And of course, as we know, and partly because we aren't building new housing, we aren't developing a lot of new property. All of our existing housing and properties is mostly going up in value. So that's just one part of what will end up being the property taxes we pay. But that's, you know, again, partly why we're focused on housing building housing, because you can spread out that, you know, the burden of our property taxes further. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's questions.
Mark, this is Matthew. Did I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is partially just lack of understanding on my part, but could you just give like a real brief overview of the process of getting projects into a bond package and, you know, if there's any look at bonding capacity of the municipality or just kind of what goes into the creation of a bond package?
Yeah, that's a good question. And then I would also encourage asking Ross Risval that, because he's, you know, one of the folks who actually helps write those. But generally speaking, we have what's called a capital program. So that's a 6-year rolling 6-year program of projects. So step one for any project typically is going into that capital program, the CIP. And so the way that those feed in, departments will identify things like, let's say there's a road that's, you know, falling in. And so they'll say that's a priority. Community councils submit projects, and those can be road projects, drainage projects, parks, you know, all these different things that we typically pay for. Sometimes we have facility bonds. Those don't happen every year, but that's another kind of general category, things like upgrading the senior center. So all of those go in that rolling 6-year program. And so that's part of our overall budget. And then there's the capital improvement budget, which is that 1 year, you know, looking at this fiscal year, what those projects are going to be. And so that includes things that do go on the bond. It includes things that we are requesting federal or state money. It can include matching transportation funds, you know, things like that. So it's really kind of what we're looking at. But then what actually ends up on the ballot is that process of voting on individual bond packages. But that's where the projects in the bond come from. So that's generally the process. But as I said, there's other ways that you can put things on the ballot or to create bonds. So the public restroom bond is one, the new cemetery bond, the new Chugach access bond. Those are all ones that are not in the CIP itself. But we have talked over time about improving the CIP process. Certainly there's questions about, you know, if you want to add a project, how far upstream do you need to do that? Can we allow for public input on projects beyond community council submitting projects? You know, there's all these kind of questions about process that it'll take a few years to untangle, I think, but we're starting to work on what that looks like.
Thank you. That's good refresher for me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hi, Anna, this is Carla. Has the assembly had a report or some kind of analysis done on, even if you allow future development or new development or encourage development, what the increase in services will be to, you know, for that development? The increase in, you know, whatever it be, water, fire, you know, whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's interesting. So I know our overall budget does basically require increasing or decreasing the overall tax cap total based on our population. So that's maybe one. I'm not saying that's a good way to do it, but that is one way that it's done now. So in the past, you know, we've been increasing population over time. There isn't a direct mechanism for that, although I will say a lot of what we're focused on in terms of housing is not necessarily building a lot of new subdivisions, like not adding a lot of road miles. Certainly that's happening. Like there's a project that Eklutna owns, the Powder Ridge Reserve subdivision. There's other reasons why we'd want to add new neighborhoods, but a lot of what we really need to do is infill development and better use of what we already have. And so some of that is really that there may not be a real measurable increase in, for example, the fire needs, because they're already within a fire service area and you're really putting new buildings on property that we already have. So I think there certainly is a correlation as you get bigger as a city, but unfortunately the reality is our city is so spread out already. It's built so low density in most places that really we would actually gain, I think, efficiencies if we had more housing and more population, concentrated in certain areas. That could also help our transit ridership, which increases federal funding. There's all these kind of, depending on what service you're looking at, there's different implications for it. And when I say efficiencies, I don't mean that we would cut the fire service. I just mean that they would not have to drive as many road miles out maybe to service a property, right? So there isn't a direct mechanism for that. I will say also, that's not something that we've been good at as a city over the decades. As we have approved new subdivisions or new roads, other cities use things like impact fees, where they literally collect a fee from a development or from the developer for adding X number of new housing units. And there's pros and cons of that. But essentially, we've built out our city in a way that we can actually fill in a lot more development. And again, that would spread out our property tax base. But it does depend on the service you're talking about and their funding streams.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Also, I'm sure you've already heard, most people I've talked to were a little bit shell shocked this year by their tax assessment. So it seemed like it jumped quite a bit. And I know we've talked about that previously, but thank you for your answer, Ann.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I'll say too, I'll send staff the links so you can watch the recording of that work session, because it does the one on property valuation. It's super valuable. I know the BAC in past years has been briefed on that. And then just to say one more thing, on the property taxes, there's two parts to it. There's the value of your property multiplied by the mill rate or the percentage of taxes that we pay. And so what happened a couple years ago actually is property values went up, but our mill rate went down slightly. Partly because we didn't need to, or, there's a certain amount of taxes that we're collecting for our budget. And so those two pieces, that's the way the formula worked out. And also we got back some of the school bond debt reimbursement that we had been, promised and then weren't getting, and then we're able to get again. So that amount was able to offset what people had to pay in property taxes for school bond debt, if that makes sense. So that's why I say, the property valuation is step one. I totally hear you that it's scary to see your property value go up that much. But we'll have to see how it shakes out in terms of how it interacts with our tax cap and then what our mill rates actually are.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I'll stick around. So
Yeah, do we know, is someone from OMB available? Oh, there she is.
under her desk. I think she was heading over.
A huge apologies. I'm putting out a fire, and our deadline for on base is in 10 minutes. So yes, I'm here.
Great, thank you, Sharon.
And I apologize, but I have only listened to probably 10% of Assemblymember Brawley's presentation because I'm trying to multitask. And I could hear out of the side of my ear that Mr. Risvold is not here yet. Is that true?
I believe he's here.
Yeah, he's in the back now. Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, good. One of the reasons why I wasn't at my chair is I was trying to run and find him. We're working on first quarter budget, and one of the things that we're doing is there's a piece of paper in the 500-page budget that tends to get overlooked, and it's called the 6-year fiscal plan. And if I were to rename it, I would call it the 6-year forecast. And normally it's not given a refresh, but this year we're going to spend some time giving it a refresh because we've had some pressures on costs that are a little bit unique and condensed, and it's mostly labor costs. So I think everyone's familiar that the police union has had a contract adjustment, and it was very very rich in year one, and it also included a change to the 401k match. We've got L71, which is in active negotiations, and we've got IBW in active negotiations, and AMEA has requested that their contracts be opened and negotiated early. The challenge for our community that is a little bit different than many communities is a lot of our revenues are capped and some of our revenues that are not capped are dedicated to things like bond payments or the Civic Center. So not a whole lot of our revenues go up when our costs go up. And so what we're planning on doing is doing a refresh of that 6-year forecast. In the analogy I'd offer is sort of the canary in the coal mine. You know, coal miners used to bring a canary down with them, and then if the canary falls to the bottom of the cage, the coal miners would know that troubles are coming, right? And so we'd like to take a look at the refresh and see if we're already in trouble, which would be defined as late 2024 or 2025. Because labor costs are going up faster than our revenues can go up. And if so, then we would know in advance, and we could take steps now to discuss without being surprised what kind of service adjustments we wanted to consider. When we think about, those of us who read the paper may have read what happened to the Juneau School District. Sort of late in the year, they discovered they had a, 25%, 40% budget problem. And even our Anchorage School District, flat, and all of a sudden, $70 million problem. And what we're trying to do here at the municipality of Anchorage is avoid exactly what happened to the Juneau School District and the Anchorage School District, where you're walking along with blinders thinking everything's great, and all of a sudden fiscal cliff. And so that's what we're trying to do with this 6-year fiscal plan, which I don't know why they call it that. It's a forecast. And so only maybe last week I sort of dug into that one piece of paper out of 500 pieces of paper, and I looked at some of the assumptions we had put into that forecast when it was produced, 2-3 months ago, and some of the forecasts are very very modest. And so using any labor contract, you crack it open, and there are these sheets in the back, and there are these grids, and it'll say if I'm grade 2, step 2. Then when my merit date comes up, I will get not only the 1% bump, but I'm also going to get 3%. So the people that are in the middle of that box get annual wage increases that are pretty healthy. It's the people that are at the top of the box that only get that 1%. And same thing with non-reps. The people who are at the top of the non-rep, which right now is grade 6, are the folks who get the 1%, or this year 3.3%. But the people who are in the middle get the 1% or the 3.3%, but they also get a step increase. But what's interesting is when you look at that one piece of paper that you might currently have, it's compiled, but it only uses 1% or 3.3% for those people. And it ignores the fact that the people who are still in the box are going to get far more. So we're going to take a look at that and decide if that was too optimistic in terms of wage growth. And so I think what we'd like to start doing is having conversations about what our wage growth may look like now that there is a lot of pressure on us from the collective bargaining groups. We just don't want to be in the same situation that the school district is in right now, 9 months from now. That's what we're trying to avoid. Hopefully my microphone was on.
Any questions for Sharon?
Hi, Mark. This is Matthew. I appreciate looking into the 6-year forecast fiscal plan. maybe once it's done, this is more of a comment, I think, but once it's done, maybe we could have a agenda item in a future meeting, kind of review what we know, what's assumed, and what an updated look at that would look like.
And that's a really good idea. And I think maybe what we might want to do is present two forecasts. One would be an optimistic forecast, where we take that 1% concept. We call that the best case forecast, where labor goes up the least amount possible. And that would be kind of what you see today if you open up that piece of paper. And then one could be an aggressive or maybe a worst case forecast, which would be a higher rate, where you'd be talking about the people in the box, those step 2, grade 2 people who are going to get the CPI increase, plus they're going to get a step increase. And that would give the reader, and we'll put them both on the same page, that would give the reader an idea of what is the range of potential outcomes. And of course, then you do have a range of what can happen to revenues, because for certain revenues that fall outside of the tax cap, things can go well and things can go not so well. And I had the unfortunate experience of being CFO back 15 years when the stock market crashed. And so, I like, if I had any luck, it'd only be bad luck. And so I can tell you that there's good times and there's bad times, and you should always want to know what things can be like when your predictions go against you. And so maybe what we can do is, have 4 predictions. What if revenues end up being 3% lower than we predict? How would that look? Because I think maybe we should stress test revenues as well, and then let people see what the different ranges would be, and help decide if we need to take any action at all. But I just don't want people to be surprised, because when I look at the 2 school districts, Juneau and Anchorage, it is surprising to me that Anchorage seems to be caught by surprise by their budget challenges, and I don't think that they should have been caught by surprise. Not that I'm judging.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Sharon, this is Anna. I know we'll talk more about this, obviously. Just to be clear, though, I don't know that the school district was surprised. I mean, I remember hearing for years they were saying, basically, once we spend through our COVID money, this is going to be a problem. So I don't know that I would characterize it as surprise. I can't speak for Juneau, though. But my question is, so you guys are looking at revenues. Are you contemplating any recommendations or analysis of new revenues, or is it really just, or changes to existing revenues, or is it really just looking at that as a constant and then the expenditure side?
So I like that question. ML&P is actually one thing that we haven't, I don't think we've talked about that with the Budget Advisory Committee. ML&P has still not been wrapped up, even though the utility was sold many years ago. And my soft conclusion, and I need more time to draw a hard conclusion, and we've reached out to Ralph DeWare, who was the primary attorney assigned to ML&P, but he's now retired, and we're going to try to get him back on contract because he has so much institutional knowledge, and we'd like to leverage that institutional knowledge. But my soft conclusion is that we messed up slightly when we accounted for the ML&P transaction, because the charter, when it comes to selling utilities, is written a little bit too simplistic. And basically it says, and I'm paraphrasing here, it says, put your proceeds into the MOE trust fund. And of course, what they meant to say was put your net proceeds in the MOE trust fund, or else you could never sell the utilities. And that's what we intended to do when we sold ML&P. And or yes, MLMP, but then we got a little bit sideways because Chugach Electric couldn't afford to purchase the entire utility at once because it would have eroded their equity. So we ended up with a very convoluted transaction where they needed 35 more years to purchase MLMP. So far, so good. So now you've got this charter that says put the proceeds in the MOA trust fund, and now you've got a tail to this tiger, right? A 35-year tail. And so the accountant said, okay, for 35 years, this little tail is going to go into the MOA trust fund. So far, so good, except that now the tail's got a little bit of a stripe to it. And here's the stripe. I've looked at the PowerPoint presentations that have been presented to the Assembly. Now, of course, I don't know if I have all of them, but I have no reason to know that I don't have all of them. And it appears that the Assembly was told the following, that there would be a lingering PERS liability to the state of Alaska for the fact that we were a PERS employer and now we're a terminated PERS employer. And on one PowerPoint, it appears the Assembly was told that this liability would be paid for 10 years. And in two other PowerPoints, it appears the Assembly was told that the payments would go for 20 years. And here's what's super interesting. When you look at the various appropriation documents that the Assembly approved, there was not a little section that addressed that 10 or 20 years of payments or addressed those payments at all. It was missing from those appropriation documents, even just some acknowledgement. But so when you've got this 35 years of payments into the UMA Trust Fund for what really would have been proceeds had Chugach been able to pay it on time, we were forgetting that along with those 35 years of payments in, we have up to 100 or more years of payments out to the state. And I have concluded, and I'm hoping to get a sole source contract to get a CPA firm to verify that they're one and the same, because it's all part and parcel of the MLMP transaction. And if the CPA firm will confirm that it's all part and parcel and it's all net proceeds, then we have paid too much money into the MOA trust fund, $4 or $5 million, and potentially, if the Assembly is supportive of this concept, we could request a refund from the MOA trust fund because we put too much money in there, and we could have a refund in 2024 or 2025, or alternatively, if they wanted a softer approach to this, we could not make those annual payments into the MOA trust fund for 5 years, which would be an extra $1 million of money that we could use for alternative purposes. So the answer to your question is that we may have found $5 million.
One time, right?
One time.
Okay, thanks.
And that took a long time for me to answer your question. So I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm saving my question for when Mr. Risvold's here, but anybody else?
This is Carla. May I ask another question while both Assemblyperson Brawley and Sharon are both on the line? And this may have been answered in the past. I'm sorry. Sometimes when I zoom into these meetings, I'm in and out. But this whole bathroom situation, is that something that's above the tax cap?
Anna, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, do you mean the proposed public restroom bond?
Correct.
So that would be, it would be like other bonds, and Ross can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but so it would not be above the tax cap, it would raise the tax cap. So if you look at the actual language in any of the bond measures, it basically authorizes, like, for example, I think it's like $1.83 per $100,000 value is what it would end up being for a person in a year. And so it allows raising the tax cap by that amount. Because otherwise the tax cap is set by the formula and it's about the operating budget, but all of our, so not just this bond, but any capital project bond operates that way. And there might be ones that are explicitly outside the tax cap, but I don't know the answer to that. But as far as I know, the language in all of the bonds, including that one, says that. And then whatever the amount actually is for each bond.
Okay, and just to put this on the ballot, is that a increasing cost to the muni? Any type of increasing cost, whether it's drafting it, putting it on the ballot, any of those kinds?
I mean, that might be a good question for Ross to answer generally in his presentation. I mean, any bond proposed, like the CASA bond, for example, I wasn't one of the sponsors, but the sponsors worked with bond counsel who we have on contract and with our staff. So I mean, that's, it's the way that any item gets on our agenda, period, because it's an ordinance, and then any of these projects. And honestly, a lot of it's really the sponsor's time, so me and Meg and Chris were chasing down a lot of questions and speaking with folks. So, to the extent that we're staff, I guess, like it's just part of what we do. It's part of the hours that we work. But Ross can answer kind of the general process for how those things work.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Sharon, for that update. We're going to move on to item 6, which is the Anchorage School District.
Thank you. So I'm Andy Ratliff. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the school district. We're going to go through a presentation or an abbreviated version that we gave the school board when we introduced it on Tuesday to the school board. And I don't know if Ms. Lessons is on, if she wants to go ahead and just do some opening remarks for this. If not, I can jump into my presentation.
Sure. Thank you so much for the chance to spend a little bit more time than we normally do. There was a request from the committee or commission to talk a little bit more about the budget process. And certainly it is a good time to talk about where we are. Before I begin, though, I really want to say that I take issue with a statement from a prior speaker that we've been walking with blinders on. I would challenge anyone to review, the past 20 years or so of ASD budget documents, which consistently articulate underfunding from the state that is not aligned with sufficient quantities of or sufficient dollars to meet our students' needs. So multiple superintendents, multiple board members are consistently showing that we have trimmed budget after budget in order to align our expenditures with revenues. This fiscal cliff, if anything, has been ignored by Juneau. So to that end, I will say that the administration, the last time I was here, I walked you all through the board's guidance for the administration, which began closing the deficit, the $98 million structural deficit for next year with sort of a super spend of our fund balance, way below best practices, which would be to retain it at 10%, to spend it down to 5%, because in some ways this is an acute emergency. In many ways, this is an emergency, and we are trying to protect our students as best as we can. So closing that $98 million with $71 million in fund balance. And then the board gave guidance to cut $1 million for Chromebooks, implement a 2-week hiring freeze to save another $1 million. There were a number of items that the board shared their preferences with the administration, and then the administration came back with kind of the remainder of another $9 or $10 million to close that gap. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy Ratliff at this point, since he has the slide deck to show how they did that.
Thank you. And I guess to preface that, our presentation as well, this budget's not ideal for any of us. It's not ideal for our administration or our school board, or probably the residents or students or staff. But we'll walk through kind of what those structural issues are, why we have to make adjustments, and just show you what those are. So this is our budget development calendar. Right now, we have introduced our budget to the school board as of Tuesday. There's going to be a work session on the budget again on the 20th, and I believe they're actually going to take it up for a vote on the 27th, at which point we need to have it turned into the assembly by the first Monday in March per charter. Kind of start with our budget development process. We start looking at where do we spend our money. By and large, that money spent on direct instruction. That's teachers, paraprofessionals in the classroom, along with the supplies, services, and software that go with it. We have student supports that make up a big chunk of that, which is our counselors, nurses, librarians, security guards, student activities, all these things that are in schools that make schools run. Ops and maintenance, that's keeping our buildings clean, functional, and keeping the lights on. And then our administration is just our basic administration functions. And that's where you hear people, why don't you just cut administration? I can tell you from my experience with the district over the last several years, or I've been there 17 years now, I've cut our accounting department in about 25%, our budget department by 33%, and the CFO department by 50%. I still have jobs and tasks that I'd had whenever I was an accountant. Just carried with me. So we have been making reductions in those administration lines throughout the last several years. Some places have added, like human resources have gone up, but we have more and more people we have to hire, so we have more and more turnover. But this is really just kind of the starting point for our budget development. The structural problem that we have, and we've been saying this for years, so it's not really kind of a head in the sand approach. However, we have been putting as much resources of this kind of one-time money into the classroom, into our district as possible. But that light blue bar at the bottom, that represents the base student allocation, or really the kind of that structural mechanism for the state to provide money to the school districts. That's been increased 0.5% over the last 8 or 9 years. So we're getting $30 more per kid than we did in August 2016. That really has stretched out the structural deficit. The line at top is what the base student allocation would be if we tied it to inflation. With the city, they have a structure where each year they adjust how much they can collect for property taxes based on population and inflation. The school district gets adjusted for population. So if we lose students, our revenue goes down. Our costs go down as well because we have specific metrics tied to those students. But we still have to experience the inflation, and that never gets caught up, or it hasn't within the state. So over the last several years, we've been filling that budget gap with either some one-time funds for the state, some use of fund balance, and recently we've been using ESSER money, or the federal stimulus relief funds, to help support those. And that was something that whenever those monies came out, the governor came out and said, you're not getting new money. You can use this money to supplant your education because there's no supplanting rules within those ESSER funds. So for FY24, we used the rest of our ESSER money, some fund balance, and then a chunk of state one-time funds. For FY25, you'll see the BSA equivalent of our fund balance is about $989 per student. And that's really how we're supporting operations, and then with about $25 million in actual reductions to our budget. Here's our upper limit summary request as it sits now. This could change before it gets to the assembly once we go through deliberations with the board. But it would be an increase in our general fund of about 10 million, which as a starting point, we brought in about a little over $20 million of teachers that we were funding through our federal grants. So you see our grants going down by about 25 million. That's the loss, or us spending out the rest of that ESSER money. And then we transferred those 164 teachers that we were paying for with the remaining of that into our general fund. So with that, you do see that going up, predominantly is the use of fund balance. Other things left pretty unchanged. The project carryover is it's not new money. It's just to report how much old money we're carrying forward and expect to potentially spend in the next year. So these are ongoing IT projects, maintenance projects, and by and large, that money is actually for charter schools. So they carry over their fund balances that way, and this allows them flexibility to spend it. Debt service goes down a little bit. The capital project fund these are our non-bond funded projects. As the school board redirected some funds for capital projects through the bond debt reimbursement process and FEMA obligations, we expect to be spending a little more in those categories. But that's based on what's already been appropriated. So overall, about 885 million is going to be our total upper limit request, and the rest of it's the on behalf payments from PERS and TERS. They're just revenue and expenditures. So how we get money from the state is through the state foundation formula. It's a 20-day count that happens during the month of October. It goes through a series of steps. It takes the brick and mortar kids at step one, adjust them based on school size. So as it adjusts that ADM, you get quite a bit more of an adjustment for smaller schools than you do for larger schools. So as you're looking at revenue per student, you talk about consolidating schools and how you lose revenue. This is really where you lose that revenue, as having larger schools equals less money per student. Then it's adjusted for a school size or a school district, a cost factor. Anchorage is the one in this, so pretty much the state says Anchorage is the least expensive place to live and do business. Then every other district gets some adjustment on top of that. Some are getting 100% adjustment down to like 7%. So some of those districts get a huge adjustment here. Some of them only get 7%, but Anchorage gets nothing. There's a special needs adjustment to pay for special education, English language learners, gifted education, and vocational education. That's like a 20% block grant style allocation that increases our ADM that way. And then there's a similar factor for CTE, which is career technical education. They adjust it by another 1.5%. And then we increase our intensive needs students. So our intensive needs students have to meet a variety of factors to be able to be considered, including specialized busing, a number of related services hours, and a 3-to-1 staff to student ratio. So we get an adjustment they take the count of the intensive needs and multiply that by 13. And then last, they add on our correspondence students, which is at 90% of the actual student count. So our actual ADM is about between our brick and mortar schools and our correspondence schools is about 42,000 or about 42,500 or so. And that goes up to 72,000 when it's adjusted. So when you talk about how much money and kind of a quick calculation of how much you get based on a BSA adjustment, you would take that 72,000, our adjusted ADM, and multiply it by a base student allocation. So if there's a $100 base student allocation, that equals about increase of about 7.2 million. It's just kind of the quick math on that. There's some other local contributions that could go into that if we knew it in time, and we could get if the assembly approved an additional allowable contribution to that. And we'll get into that, how that's calculated here in a second. The rest of the formulas, like I said, they take the 72,000 and multiply that by the base student allocation. So that generates kind of a basic need, what the state calls it, a 429 million. From that, we have a required local effort. So every year that the state adjusts how much money we pay, or they say that the municipality has to pay towards education. And it's 2.65 mils of the second preceding year. So we use the 2023 full value of property taxes to determine that mill rate, or and multiply by 2.65 mils to get the required amount of local taxes. We receive money from federal impact aid. We get about $15 or $16 million for that, and that's federal money from the federal government for the kids that are living on base predominantly, or other non-taxable lands. So it's kind of a payment in lieu of property taxes. But since we get that, the state meets what they call a disparity test, which allows them to take some of that money from us. So the state takes about half of that money back through their formula. Then they give us $16 per student for that quality schools grant, which is about 1.1 million, for a total of about 303 million in state revenue. Then the city can chip in an additional 23% of that basic need number to help as an additional allowable local contribution. So that's a maximum number. We're requesting, again, the max. We've been fortunate to have a community that supports education in our assemblies, but in our administrations have been supportive of keeping this at the max. So very thankful for that. But that's 23% of that basic need number. And why that's 23% goes back to that federal impact aid reduction. That disparity test says on an adjusted ADM basis, you have to be within, all districts have to be within 25% of each other. So by setting this at 23%, that's how they are allowed to, and limiting the amount the local governments can push into to schools, that's how they keep reducing the federal impact aid from districts. So if they don't meet that disparity test, it turns out to be about an $80 or $90 million problem for the state. So our general funds, as we go through that, the big changes are using our fund balance, and this will kind of tie into the presentation Mr. Risvold is going to give shortly. This draws us down to about 5% of our fund balance, and that's calculated as a percentage of our unreserved fund balance divided into our total expenditures. So of that 5%, that would be about 32 million or so dollars. 26 of that, as you'll see later, is going to be reserved for or restricted for bond debt ratings. And then the other 6 million would be just kind of flexible unassigned money. So it really draws us down to very little usable fund balance. Our interest earnings, as you see, like the federal funds rate going up, it's 8.25%, 8.5% or something. That's really what's triggering this high increase in our interest earnings. And that's kind of helped us balance our budget, but it does add a little more risk because a lot of our investments are in a mark-to-market approach. And if those go down, like I said, when the stock market crashes, you could definitely see a reduction in those. The E-rate is a federal reimbursement for telecoms. We just signed a new contract with ACS for next year to provide internet and phone service. And this E-rate, they're going to start doing that reimbursement for us. So we're going to see a reduction on our expenditure side and our revenue side. So we're taking out our portion of the reimbursement, and then ACS gets that instead. They apply directly for it and just bill us less. It should be a more efficient process. We are raising facility rental fees and user fees for sports by a little bit to help offset the cost of those programs. And then on the state side, you see that one-time funding that was outside the BSA for FY24. You see that going away. And then the other reductions are going to be the 7.1 million is a combination of the amounts that could be shifted to the municipality through the required local contribution, which actually went down a little bit, and then a decline in enrollment projected for next year or from the adopted budget. We actually lost quite a few students in the current year as compared to what we projected, and we're projecting that to go down a little bit more. So about 7.2 million loss in revenue just because of the student count. And then impact aid is going up a little bit just based on the number of kids living on base. So kind of a historical.
Hey, Andy, there are a couple of hands. I don't know if it's appropriate to pause right now.
Oh, I can't see anything. All I can see is my slide. Yeah, yes. Happy to answer questions now.
Yeah, I had a quick question on the last slide. I thought I heard you say that user fees and facility rentals were going up slightly, but I see that decrease. Am I looking at that correctly? So facility rentals are going up, but user fees are going down, or?
Okay, so that was my spiel for the school board that was kind of warmed up by a different presentation. Yes, they are going to go down a little bit overall, but we're actually going to increase the rates that users are paying for sports. For this year, we're projected to be quite a bit or under budget, we're collecting not as much revenue as we expected. So our total revenue projection is going down, but our user fee for those are going to go up. If that makes sense.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Sorry, that wasn't clear yet.
And was there, I'll help facilitate online. Was there another hand up earlier?
I think I saw Matthew maybe had a question.
Yeah, it was on the previous slide, and the required local effort. Is that with regards to required local effort, is that in state statute, or where does that come from, the 2.65, or is it in the municipal code?
That's a state statute.
And then the follow-up on that is if the BSA were to increase, that required local effort would then likely increase too. I'm not sure if who's this a question for, but I'm just thinking of the effect that might have on the tax cap and other budgets that rely on property taxes. Not sure if it's really a question for AST, but more so just something I was pondering.
Well, and I can speak to some of that. The required local effort won't change at all. It's that additional allowable that could change. So if the state were to give us an additional, say, $10 million in state funds, we could increase our local effort by 2.3 million, so 23% of that. But yeah, that is a good conversation because we do all fall under the same municipal tax cap once we add those together.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And this is Anna on Assembly. If I can just briefly add, my general understanding of the formula is when the state pays less through the BSA. It's also true that then we end up kind of filling in more of the gap. And I think I see Andy nodding, so I can't speak to the detail,
I've got a
but
slide on that.
oh, yeah. So essentially it means that there is cost shifting from the state to the local government as a result of the formula. And then we're also hamstrung by the fact that we, like, even if we wanted to pay for the entire school budget, well, one, that's not financially feasible for the city. Two, we aren't legally allowed to do that. So this idea that we could just fill in that hole is not necessarily, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about, but I'll turn it back to Andy.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. That helps me a lot.
So this is kind of the slide that'll kind of outline that. So the Anchorage property values from FY17 to 25 have gone up about 16%. And it would be the 2015 tax year to the 2023 tax year, just a 2-year lag. But it's gone up, and then the required local contribution has gone up by that exact same percentage. And then the state has gone down by 27 million in that same time period. So of that 27 million, it's 16.6 of it from the required local contribution has been shifted to the city. The additional allowable has gone down because that's more tied to enrollment than it is anything else. And since the city's been good about putting this to the cap every year, that has to go down based on the statutes as well. We have been fortunate. The city started being able to kick in money for our transportation fund. It's not an operational fund as considered by the state currently. So in 2017, that was a fully state-funded program to run our buses. That stayed flat since 2015-16. We still get the same $481 per kid. But as we've lost students, we get less money, but it's really hard to run fewer routes because not everyone leaves from the same neighborhood. So inflation's really kind of eating our lunch on the transportation side. Last year, we had to, we suspended a lot of our bus routes. We didn't get them in place until we were able to settle a contract with our bus drivers, which included about a 25% increase in wages. So those costs for transportation have just gone up, but our funding's actually from the state's gone down. So the city's been able to pick up the remainder on that. But overall, over the course of those years, the state's paying $27 million. If nothing else changes for 25, $27 million less than what they paid in 2017 to support education. And the city's paying $23 million more.
Hey, Andy, this is Kelly again. I'm going to just take a moment to jump in and say this is one of the reasons that the board was so appreciative to collaborate with the Assembly this fall on a joint resolution. One of the tenets of that joint resolution was, in fact, to adjust our pupil transportation. Another one was to adjust that district cost factor that currently places Anchorage at 0, whereas other districts around the state get multipliers. And that data is over 20 years old, so older than our students. And it may be time to revisit the data that is informing the district cost factor, which is that first multiplier in the foundation formula. So it's very clear in this slide that Anchorage taxpayers are paying significantly more than they used to as the state is paying less. So I think that's something for all of us to take note of. Thanks, Andy.
Right, that's something we get asked a lot. Why my taxes keep going up, but you guys continue to need more money. This is why, it's because when your taxes go up, the state gives us less and we have the same amount of money. So we don't get more money overall. It's just a shifting on who pays. So we'll start getting into how we're going to balance our budget. The first thing is we are going to increase our pupil-teacher ratios at grades 4 through 12 by 1. So on its face, it just says one more kid or one more student per teacher in the metric. But what that really equates to is fewer electives available at secondary schools, more combination classes in elementary, and less support in those schools for when kids are having behavioral issues or what it might be. But it's not just, we just put one more kid in every class. We have to have fewer teachers to do that because we have the same number or fewer students. So that's where it kind of gets tricky. And I think we kind of lose sight of what the impacts of those PTR adjustments are sometimes.
And sorry, we haven't really planned this out, but the bigger budget document, which is, I think Andy shared it with the commission, but it's certainly online. I think it's Appendix F as in Frank, will show school by school how the pupil to teacher ratio increase is affecting that school next year. Will the school lose 1.5 teachers? Will it lose 2 teachers? Every school has a slightly different scenario, but if you're a parent or grandparent, that might be of interest to you. So again, that's Appendix F in the budget.
I'm still getting into some of the other projects. I'll try to speed this along because I know Ross wants to get up here as well. Some of the other changes we're making is with our elementary immersion programs. We currently have 7 of those at our elementary schools. Currently, we provide 12 FTE outside of the basic pupil-teacher ratio metrics. So this would reduce 5 of those, and each one of those schools would still get an extra teacher to support that. Increasing PTR by 1 at grades 4 to 12 results in a reduction of 36 teachers. And then just purely based on enrollment, as our number of students have gone down, we're going to reduce another about 36 students. The programmatic changes are predominantly at our alternative schools. Stellar is adding a 6th grade as we're changing 6th graders we're moving our 6th graders from elementary to middle schools. SAVE is changing the nature of their program, where they used to be like half day, then half kind of a work education type thing where they'd be out in the community. So they needed less staff, but they're doing more full day work. And then we had some changes with our AK virtual and AK choice programs, which is our correspondence programs and other kind of enrichment for virtual or other online options. The middle school staff, as we're moving all our 6th graders into our middle schools from elementary, is going to increase about 18 FTE with 4 assistant principals, 7 counselors, some office admin and security for the most part, then an hour time for a library assistant. With that, though, we're removing all the 6th grade band and orchestra from elementary schools. That'll save about 14 FTE overall, and then we're adding about 10 of that back to the middle schools to support more students in there. And then we have some other school-based enrollments as just or enrollment-based changes that are just based on the number of students we have. The biggest thing on there is the kindergarten paraprofessionals is a reduction. Our standard is 1 3.5-hour kindergarten paraprofessional per classroom. That won't change, but we just expect the number of classrooms we have to have fewer of those. And then overall, the charter schools are adding 21 FTE. A lot of these are coming in from their use of ESSER funds as well. But some of it is new positions. I think Alaska Native Cultural Charter School added some teachers assistants in there. But the charter schools are going to use a lot of their fund balance as well. So they're going to use about $1.6 million to help support their overall budgets. As we break that down a little further, moving our 6th graders to middle school is going to increase our middle school allocation by 82.4 based on the current metrics, and decrease elementary schools by about 84. So not a whole lot of change overall on those. The bigger change is going to be with the enrollment, where it's decreasing it predominantly at elementary schools. That's where we've seen the biggest loss, a little bit at middle schools, and increased some at high schools. The alternative schools, like I mentioned, those are changing based on the programmatic need. The slide before had 10.6. It had a couple other adjustments in there, such as it rolled in the 1.6 difference in middle school. We added a FTE to Rogers Park for their highly gifted program, and then Family Partnership cut a couple FTE. The PTR increase of grades 4 through 12 resulted in reductions about 8.5 at elementary schools, about 10 at middle, 14 at high, and 4 at alternative programs.
Hi there. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have a question. This is Carmela. I have a question on slide 11, the school-based changes. the middle school staff to support sixth graders, the 18.06. And then the subsequent slide, is that basically, so it's basically a net of what, 1.6 FTEs? If you take the increase and net out the decrease to the elementary staff? Am I understanding that correctly?
No, the 18 would be, those are new staff that we've added. When we moved the teachers over, it resulted in about a 1.6 FTE decrease overall.
Okay.
But that would be new staff.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, so it's 18.06 new staff.
The fine arts teacher would be a reduction based on that too. So maybe a net of 13.
Okay, thank you.
Carmela, I think that a lot of the new staff reflect the increased size of the school, so they needed additional, like an additional BPO. They needed an additional assistant principal to really attend to students' needs. Am I getting that right, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. As we're increasing our student populations in our schools by about, 7 of those schools by about a third. So we'll have the 4 largest middle schools in the state now coming online. So that's really the increases just based on the sheer size and population in those.
Sure. I was trying to see where that netted out when you take away what's being reduced at the elementary school level. So thanks for the clarification, Andy.
Yeah. The net would probably be more related to the 1.6 for the teachers, the fine arts reduction, and then the ads for the middle school. And then later on, you'll see we had to add some custodial support as more classrooms will need clean and the buildings will probably be dirty or having more kids in them. So special service changes, most of these are just kind of ones and twos that we've made, not a lot of significant adjustments with the exception of the Ignite program. That would reduce all 20 Ignite teachers and then add back 2 teaching experts for a STEAM model. And that would really kind of combine our art and health programs into one STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So 1 person at each school, and that would reduce the number of the travel time or the number of shared teachers per school because it'd be combined into 1 position. Whereas right now we have our art and health teacher will rotate around. They'll spend like 2 weeks or a week or 2 at 1 school, go to another school, and maybe go to a 3rd school. So it'll help a little bit with consistency. But that's the biggest programmatic change. You will see some things like those special education holdback positions. We reduced those by 10. And these were positions that were largely vacant. We just can't hire our special education paraprofessionals or our teachers. So we just reduced those as we didn't anticipate being able to fill them. We also reduced 10 holdback positions. I don't know if I shared that much on the previous slides, but those were in elementary and secondary schools. And holdback positions generally for those are to address class size bubbles in the fall where we might have a class size of 40 and that just gets untenable. So we need to go down so we can push a little more staff out, have some flexibility there. And then in secondary schools, it's usually for scheduling conflicts or to add like an extra period of French or something. But those get pushed out generally in the fall. And right now we have 31 FTE. Next year we'll have 21 on our gen ed side and then 0 on our special ed side. And then in both all of our schools, departments, and special service departments, we decreased our supply budgets by about 10% initially. So just trying to find any way we can reduce our budget without cutting those classroom staff as much as possible. But when we have a $98 million shortfall, it's starting to get pretty difficult. These are the changes that we made in our administration departments. Removing yet another accounting position, a few changes in staffing for HR, but no net increase or decrease in FTE. The bigger line items, the preschool staffing, those are professionals for the most part that are being filled by special education. So they have another pot of money in special education, pre-skills. So that's what those classrooms and those paraprofessionals were used for. So they don't need those anymore. It won't be a reduction in service necessarily. The other bigger chunk will be the 7 FTE in elementary school administration. This was from a Creating Successful Futures program. It used to be at Northwood Elementary, where we would send students over there that had behavior issues. And they would get like 9 weeks of instruction there and go back to their home school. This was going to be a model that pushed staffing up to schools where those students resided instead of moving the students. However, again, with staffing shortages and with COVID, this never really got off the ground. So these are vacant, and we're going to reduce those. But other than that, those are the kind of the big changes for our FTE. A couple of warehouse drivers going away, the addition of the custodians for the middle schools. But then our big chunks of money going away are our services, supplies, and equipment, and that's going to be our Chromebooks going away. We're going to scrap a planned adoption for social studies that hasn't been updated for a while. And then there's some contracts with mental health for community-based counselors that are going to be shifted over to a Project Aware grant. Some reductions in added duty, that was mostly for training on the Alaska Reads Act, bringing teachers back. We don't plan on doing that in the fall, so it shouldn't have a huge impact. We're cutting nearly all of the district-wide travel money out. There should be about $100,000 left after that. And then we'll institute a 2-week hiring delay for really non-hard to fill positions or teachers. So like our special education staff, those are going to continue to go through without a 2-week hiring delay just because we can't hire them as fast anyway. And anyone that wants to apply, we want to get them hired as quickly as possible. So overall, about 17 FTE. So how we close the gap is the fund balance a little bit, and this is reconciled to our pro forma, which is our original estimate of our budget gap, and not really the FY24 to FY25 budget changes. So that's where it kind of gets a little tricky when we're trying to reconcile to something that never really happened. So the budget gap, we closed our fund balance, and to note that fund balance really came from a couple sources. The one being we saved our one-time state money from this year, about half of it, to roll over to help offset deficits 25. And then we have about 400 or 450 perpetual vacancies in our staffing that's just accumulates over time and gives us just quite a bit of unspent money. So that's where most of that 71 million came from. A few changes in our revenue and then our reductions. And these actually tie to our Appendix C in our budget book, which is our detail by department change. But overall, we're going to reduce staff by about 96 FTE for about $25 million to be able to get down to a balanced budget. So really the key takeaways, class sizes are going up, our services are going to be diminished, and our user fees are going to increase, including and then we'll have less flexibility for enrollment changes based on those holdback positions going away. We are going to have increased risk. I don't want to kind of sugarcoat that, but our emergency reserves are going to be about depleted. We are increasing our attrition estimates, which is how much money we estimate are going to be that we're going to have in unfilled positions. So anytime we have a vacancy or if there's turnover or someone waives the medical insurance, it all goes into this attrition estimate. That's been going up really quickly over the last several years. We've just had more and more vacancies post-COVID, and then kind of the more aggressive revenue projections, particularly with our interest earnings. So we are putting a lot of more risk, it's like I mentioned, Juneau School District, and that's kind of what they did. They put a lot of risk on themselves and ended up going into the negative. We certainly don't want that, and I don't think we're going to be there, but that risk does increase with this budget. So as we look at our attrition, this is kind of the bigger thing of how we get our fund balance and have all that money left over. We really don't want to have that money left over because we want to preserve our FTE to be able to push that out into our schools and our staffing. This is just kind of a historical look at it. The gold bar running across is our total attrition, is our percentage of our budget. And then down at the bottom, it'll show the total amount that we didn't spend out of our salary and benefits budgets. So in 2013, we had about $5.4 million of unspent salary and benefit money. Fast forward to 2022, we had 28 million. 23, we had 51 million. In 23, we did shift about 5 or 6 million to ESSER money to close out the SRSA grant. So that should come down a little bit. And then we're projected to have about 41 million left over for FY '24. And FY '24, we're going to use a pretty similar percentage. So another 41 million is what we're going to project as unspent salary and benefits. So if we have like some sort of economic condition where a lot of people need to take government jobs, we have like a crash in the private sector, that could go down. That's where we kind of we could potentially miss the mark. And this doesn't give us a lot of flexibility for our other enrollment losses either. So that's kind of the takeaway on this is our budget is going to be quite a bit tighter and a little more risky going forward. So as a 24 to 25 this is our transportation department, just showing what that revenue is going down from the state, and then the request for an increase for general fund contributions from the property taxes. Anticipate that go up by 4 million, and we've spent out all our fund balance in this current year for transportation, so we don't really have anything to carry forward. The tax request from FY '24 to FY '25 is shown here. The full value of our property taxes went down from 22 to 23 a little bit. So we will save about 200,000. That the state will pick up that 200,000. Our additional local contribution goes down based on enrollments. And then our transportation is going up as it's not subject to the state cap quite yet. And then our debt service is going down. So right now we're at about a $1.2 million reduction in overall property taxes requested for 24 to 25. As that relates to our tax cap, I know we're under one tax cap for an entire city and district, but as the district does calculate theirs separately just to ensure that we're staying under our calculation as well. So we see a 5-year average population going down and our 5-year CPI going up. The net result, and plus the new construction, is about $7 million or so increase in what Anchorage's tax cap could potentially be. Right now, we're about $5 million. We're calculating about $5 million under that cap based on what we can actually support. So we'll see where we get that. If the city does or the state makes some adjustments and allows us to increase our contribution, that might go up before this gets to the city, but that's where it sits right now. So with that, that's the presentation. Didn't leave a whole lot of time for Ross, but. If there's any other questions too.
I raised my hand. I'm not sure if you can see that.
You can't see it, no.
Okay, so thank you so much, Andy, for that presentation. Is this slide deck available somewhere publicly?
On the BAC.
I believe it's posted on the BAC and on the school district web pages.
Okay, I'll check it out there. Thanks.
Just as a reminder for everyone, there's a great hub for this financial process, and it's asdk12.org/FY25. So as documents are produced, that's where materials are being saved. And then as long as I have the mic on, I'll continue. One more thing. We do have a meeting on February 20th, and it's my understanding that at that meeting, there will be a determination of whether or not to hold a special meeting on the 27th.
Right. Now, I guess if you look at this presentation on the district website, this is the one I gave you guys is kind of, it's trimmed out a little bit from the one we gave the school board. So there's a little more information about where staff is being added to different schools and things on that one. But it should have, it's the same information.
So I'm not sure how much time you had planned for your presentation.
I'm available.
Okay. I'd like to make sure we give him a full amount of time to complete this, but we're 10 minutes away from the planned end of the meeting. So
should I only ask Ross some of the questions that we had talked about last time?
I have a.
Okay.
why don't you go ahead and,
All right.
you know, if you can sure do it,
Okay.
that would be great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you,
I'm sorry,
commission members and others. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I've got a PowerPoint, Aaron. Do you want me to present that, or is that okay? Or
Are you able to display it? Do you have it? Okay.
yes. So thanks again for letting me be here at this meeting with regard to fund balance and the rating agencies primarily. My name is Ross Griswold. I'm the public finance manager with the municipality, and I work for the CFO, Alden Thurn. And I did receive a handful of questions from Sharon here that was good to have. And I just go through these, and then if there's any other questions or along the way, I can certainly address them. Excuse me. I did invite Steve Cantor, who is our municipal advisor with Masterson Advisors. He is on the phone as well with his colleagues, Kayla McEwen and Brendan Cooney. They're available to answer and enhance any questions and enhance any responses that I have as well. But these questions are very good questions, and they're pretty straightforward. First question was, does Anchorage have 2 bond ratings? And the answer is we just have 1 general obligation bond rating for our GO bonds, which is for our capital projects for the general government and the school district. The municipality has other bond ratings for other enterprise funds, such as the or utilities, such as the water utility, the wastewater utility, and the port. Those ratings are all separate based on their credit. So the credit of the municipality is its general obligation to the investors, and largely based upon our ability to tax them. Second question was, if ASD spends down its fund balance from 7% to 4%, will that affect our bond rating and our cost of borrowing? So essentially, ASD is a component unit of the MOA, and their financials are not directly in the rating agency scoring process. The rating analysts have a very complex grid of or spreadsheet where they use to calculate a number of drivers or rating drivers or criteria that they use to generate a rating for the municipality or a local government credit, such as the municipality. And generally speaking here, it's the municipality's annual report that they use for the scoring process for our rating. However, any decrease in the fund balance for ASD or as well as the MOA eventually could have a negative impact on how the rating agencies view and rate the municipality. And if there is a decrease in fund balance and it impacts the rating, it will increase the cost of funds. So in the next page is, can you estimate the impact to our cost of borrowing? This is a challenging question because the impact of a rating downgrade is difficult to quantify. This is due to the many variables in the marketplace that are in effect on a particular day when you're pricing the bonds. However, it is reasonable to say that a rating downgrade will increase the cost of funds for an issuer such as the municipality. Another question is it possible that ASD's fund balance is the cause of our recent downgrades
In,
fund balance? Maybe that did downgrades.
that was a type, if I wrote that, that's a typo in bond rating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just saw that too.
Yeah,
Thank
my
you, Chair.
mistake.
Thank you. So is it possible that ASD's fund balance is the cause of a recent downgrade in the MOA's general obligation rating?
Yeah.
That's probably the best question, and it's a good one. The recent downgrades are solely based upon the municipality's lack of meeting its fund balance policy, not the ASD's policy, but the MOA's policy. The municipality spent its fund balance on the responses to the 2018 earthquake and the COVID-19 pandemic. I will add this question and ask Steve to comment, but I will add this comment. It is somewhat rare when a rating agency downgrades a credit or a local government or a bond issuer, also known as a credit. It is rare when one criteria alone will cause a downgrade. Because there are so many criteria and rating drivers involved in the process. You can be out of the range of good for one or two criteria, but you're above the range in another one or two criteria, and it kind of weights itself out in their analyses. However, that's absent the fact where you just didn't make debt service on your bonds or you didn't pay your creditors. Well, that's going to trigger it as well. But in this case, our inability to meet fund balance, our fund balance policy for a couple of years in a row was the criteria, was the one criteria that they downgraded us for in the case of S&P and Fitch. And like I said, it's somewhat rare for that to happen, but in this case, they felt it was so important that they needed to address that for us. And Mr. Cantor, do you have any other color that you could add to that, if you would, sir?
Good afternoon, everyone. As well said, I'm Steve Cantor. I work in Masters Advisors. We're the municipal advisor to the municipality. Ross, I think the other factor that came into the rating process was that that planning for the restoration of the fund balance was going to take a considerable period of time. It would be one thing if the fund balance policy was not met for 1 year and we were able to recover it immediately or the year after, but we were projecting a longer term recovery to get to the fund balance policy, and the rating agencies felt that that period of time was too long to maintain the current ratings.
Thank you for that reminder, and that's we've talked about that many times with the analysts and yourself, Steve. So thank you for that. I will go to the next page where there's two more questions here. Don't we have a written agreement with ASD that they will maintain a 10% fund balance? Now, ASD does have fund balance policy. There's two of them, and they're delineated in the next 2 pages where I have some slides to talk about that. However, in the meantime, another question was, have we been communicating with them about their compliance or lack of compliance with that agreement? And I can say affirmatively that the public finance staff is in frequent communication with the finance staff at the school district. I've known Andy here for quite some time. In fact, perhaps I've known him for his entire time at the school district when he said he's been there 17 years. And because I know I've been here longer, I'm pretty sure it's been quite some time, as I've known Ms. Lechner here for quite some time as well. And so we are in communication with them about many issues, including fund balance. So now we'll go back sort of to the other question there about the policies of the muni or of the school district. And there is and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong here along the way, because you're the expert mostly here, and appreciate your input. ASD has a 10% fund balance requirement And that's a reserve of 10% of its local tax appropriation revenue. And it's called a bond rating designation. And it's pursuant to an ASD memorandum number 225, approved on March 22, 2012, upon recommendation by the Municipal Assembly's Resolution 2011-345. ASD has met this requirement in the past 3 fiscal years. And these numbers come right off of their financial statements. Right, Andy?
Yep.
Yeah, and Andy's obviously had a chance to review these slides and has been part of this process. So this criteria here, or this fund balance requirement, is just setting aside 10% of the local tax revenue from the municipality, as stated. So you can see that the tax revenue from 21 to 22 to 23 has grown over time. And they do have a 10% number there, and their actual amount in the financial statements is 10%. Now, if you prefer bar charts, I have the same numbers in a bar chart here. It's a bar chart in a line graph, thanks to some of my staff members who helped me make these things. So you can see that the required fund balance, the line there is right at the top of the bar, which is the actual fund balance. Same numbers from the same prior page. Now we'll go to Andy's second fund balance requirement. And it's ASD 8% of, and it's called 8%, which is called a unreserved fund balance in the general fund of at least 8% of current expenditures. We at the municipality sometimes refer to that as current year expenditures, pursuant to ASD board policy, Article 3, so forth. And I actually looked that up. One of my staff members looked that up and did a great job coming up with this. And I checked it out, and that is the second requirement. And it's a different calculation. It's current year expenditures versus the prior slide was based on revenues from local government, municipality. In this case, the fund balance is considered restricted under GASB. Now, there's different ways that this is presented in financial statements, and I am no expert on that, and that's why Andy and Sharon are here if there are comments about that. But in the meantime, 8% of the expenditures of the school district have decreased over time, as you can see, and the required amount is projected there on the second line, which is the 8% line. And you can see that the actual amount is greater than the required amount of 8% over the last 3 years. Now, I'm not forecasting anything for the year ending June 30, 24, which we're halfway through, or for 25, which is the discussion at hand here in other parts of this meeting. But this is the historic expression of the last 3 years of financial statements, which we have. Again, we have the bar chart and the line chart for you to see, sort of helps look at it a different way. There's a 9.3 in 2021, the 811 in 22, and the 21.5 in 23. And it is my understanding that the 21.5 is potentially is under discussion to perhaps go down. And again, as Andy and I have discussed, and as he certainly knows, the school district's effort is to attempt to maintain their 2 requirements for fund balance. And those are the 2 that the school district has. In the old days, there was a memorandum of understanding between the school district and the municipality, but these 2 here are the most recent fund balance requirements. Have I framed that correctly, Andy?
Yeah, I think so. And that's our understanding as well. It's just kind of taking into account the different calculations, one based on how much taxes and one are total expenditures, which includes all our state money. For projecting at the end of 24, I think that I want to say goes down like 17%. And then, if we're in the unfortunate event where we do have to spend down our money in our fund balance in FY25, that would go down to 5%, so below the board policy, so it would take a supermajority to get that passed and then develop a plan to make that back up. But that would maintain the bond rating reserve in whole, and then a little bit in our unassigned. But there are some different classifications on the 8% is actually, or what's considered reserved or unreserved is in state statute. It doesn't align with GASB 54 that delineates how we have to report our fund balances. So there is a disconnect between state statute and GASB.
I'm not on the committee, so technically I'm not allowed to ask a question, but I'm dying to ask a question. Does that mean that right now you've got 31.5% in fund balance? Because you've got the 10% plus.
No, so the 10% would fall under that 21. So of that, and that's about 4% of our total expenditures.
Oh,
So about 4% of that 21% is the bond rating.
okay.
Yeah, they're not
So it's
additive.
what's in there.
Yeah,
In other words, they're not additive.
Okay,
yeah, that's kind of where you get the confusion on it.
okay.
Yeah, so that's the extent of what I prepared here today based on the questions I received from Sharon, and happy to answer any questions. And it's we have the benefit of our municipal advisor here as well to address any questions that could come up.
Well, my questions are, I go all the way back to the beginning of our meeting when Assembly Representative Anna was talking about the bond package for this year. And I guess my first question is, what is our current bond, I guess fee, right? For what's our hurdle rate for,
Pardon me?
what is the percent of our, that we would pay on
The interest rate on the bonds?
interest rate on bonds? What's that? What is that right now?
What is the last one?
Kayla, do you recall, have we run a transaction lately where what we would identify our cost of funds as? Do you know what we put in the resolutions, Andy? I am not sure what we used to calculate the estimated debt service. It's in the C, the SEE, that's attached to each one of them. And we use the same interest rate to do a what if analysis. And that's based on an interest rate that existed, several months ago when we started this. Of course, the interest rate changes every day. But since there's probably isn't a material change from that, but that interest rate that's identified in the summary of economic effects, that's the interest rate that we used. Now, when it comes time to sell bonds to generate cash to pay the expenditures that come in, then we would sell bonds to generate cash. And at that point in time, it could be a year down the road. So you do not know what the interest rate is going to be today, but we make an assumption based on, what the market is today when we include the analysis into the C. We say, okay, well, if you issue the bonds today, this is what the debt service would be. But chances are we're not issuing these bonds for a year or more.
Okay.
Because it takes that time, it takes that amount of time to get the program going, do the work and get an invoice.
Okay. And then typically it'd sell over the course of many years. Or it'd sell chunks of them off.
Right.
Right. Right. We would sell only what we need.
Okay.
This is Kayla. To answer the question that was asked, I believe the current rate that's being used was calculated back in October of 23.
Thank you, Kayla. Happy to answer any other questions.
This is Matthew. I have another question. This one might be for Andy. What's the effect of the state statute differing from GASB and with regards to the definition of unreserved? Is that
really? Right now, it doesn't really affect us as much as they used to be a 10% cap on what we'd consider unreserved. So that really gave Anchorage a 6% cap because we had to take the 4% out for the bond rating. But right now they have lifted that 10% cap through FY '25. So that's why we're able to carry over more money now that we can spend for FY '25. But once that goes back into effect, again, we'll have less flexibility than other districts. We're the only districts that does that, so they don't make an exception for that. I know they're putting in a process at the state to try to align their statutes with GASB 54, the reporting mechanism, so they'd be in line. And I think in that regard, it might become a reserved fund balance or restricted fund balance versus unreserved or unrestricted.
Okay, thank you.
This is Carmela. I have a question. First, I want to say thank you both to Andy and Ross for the presentations and for coming this afternoon to give the information to us at the BAC. My question is, I've asked a couple of questions about the move to middle school, and it's something that's been of interest to me. And if I read it right, it looks like that's an increase of 1.9 roughly. And I'm curious, is that, you know, as a resident, just to try and wrap my mind around it a little bit, is it the right year if we have such a historical budget deficit to make a move? Is there a way to delay this without impacting students? So if we are in in the heightened situation like we are, does this need to be done this year? And could we recognize cost savings there? That's my first question. So I'll pause there because I know it's after 1, but that's my first question.
No, it's a great question. But yeah, I mean, just looking at it, you could recognize some cost savings. However, you know, I've been doing this for 17 years and none of the years have been the right years. We always start out with a budget deficit. Anyone that's paying attention to it, every single year we've had a deficit until the legislature makes up their minds. So if we really want to make any sort of systemic change, at some point we really have to just rip that Band-Aid off and do it. Because if you're trying to do it in a year, you know, you're going to get more money. That hasn't happened since I've been here.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. And my children are in the school district, so I do pay attention and I appreciate the hard work that you're doing to help support the educational components for our students. But you said earlier, it's an unprecedented time. So that in my mind, I was just looking, you know, thinking from just a perspective of, you know, a resident. We have the Inlet View rebuild that's partially bonded and partially funded through the budget. And then we have the move to middle. And our teachers and educators work so hard to help our youth. You know, is it the time for us to make those moves? Or is that, I guess here's a question that maybe for Kelly as well as you is that through the deliberative process while we're looking at the budget before it goes to the assembly? Are those questions that are going to be factored? Like, is this something that can keep? Is this something that we need to do right now? I know there was a lot of public expressions of both for and against Inlet View and the rebuild. And I know we're over time now, but as you guys go through the deliberative process to get to the final before you submit it to the assembly, are those conversations that are on the agenda? And thank you so much for answering these questions.
Yeah, and I'd have to defer to Ms. Lessons on most of those questions, so they're more political in nature. Most of my job is just telling you how much it costs and where those changes are.
Sure. So I'm not taking a political approach from it. I'm just thinking to the budget. You know, if it's a tight budget at my house, or at anybody's house, do we look to how we can cover our expenses? So I'm just asking questions to understand how the process works. Andy, thanks a lot for your help. And Kelly, thanks for all the information you've sent over my way too, as I've worked to wrap my head around the move to middle school.
Yeah, thanks for Carmela, you are a great question asker. So thank you so much for that. I think it has been a very deliberative process, and I'll be blunt, with the declining enrollment, one of the things the community has expressed, I guess, support for, but there has been support among many community members to consolidate schools. And that was a process that was part of last year's budget discussion. The board closed one school at that point in time. I expect that the move to middle school will be a part of conversations that I fully expect to be having next year. It's my understanding that the district is going to be producing some sort of a rubric regarding which schools may be recommended for closure sometime this spring. And then they would use that rubric sort of during the fall to generate and identify schools that would be presented for consolidation. I don't know, this time next winter. So I think that, is the time right? I think it's one of the steps in running a more efficient school district with the end result of delivering, we got to get the combo classes down. We've got to be able to make sure that our schools are fully staffed when it comes to nurses and librarians and, all of the people that make our schools run. So that's a long answer to your question, but I do think it's been very deliberative. We are facing some pretty tight financial picture. I expect a very robust discussion at our upcoming meeting on the 20th, possibly with a follow-up conversation on the 27th of this month, and certainly more community conversations over the next year around consolidations.
Thank you both. Appreciate your answers.
All right. Well, because we are well over time, but I do want to open up. Do we have anybody from the public online? And I guess I would open it up to any questions from them. Okay. All right, then is there anything else from the commission members that are on the call that they wanted to bring up for this meeting?
This is Matthew, just super brief. Great presentations. I hadn't really seen that level of detail of ASD's budget before, so I appreciate that. And thanks, Ross. And thank you, Mark, for being there in person to chair the meeting. And and then other future topics, discuss these in another time. There's the sales tax proposal from Choose Anchorage, AEDC, for a possible future meeting, 6-year plan update. Just a few things to think about for future meetings.
Yeah, those are great topics, Matthew. Do we want to also include the presentation from maintenance and operations next month?
Do we want to do sales tax first? What's the will of the committee?
This is Matthew. I'm not sure what the timeline on the sales tax proposal is, or if that's gotten assembly input or in front of them yet. It's I'd say M&O if that's not moving right now.
Okay.
I think that this is Carmela. I agree with that. And I would ask for perhaps at our March meeting that we have a line item for discussion of department reviews and what that looks like as we look ahead to the 25 budget process, if we're going to do it by commissioner or if we're going to do it as a body and what that might look like, so we can get ahead of the plan. If that works for everybody.
Sounds good to me.
This is Brian. I would agree with that as well. It seems like doing it earlier in the year as opposed to the last 2 years. We tend to do it more in September, October, and kind of get lost in everything else and in the shuffle.
Yeah, I agree as well.
Can OMB recommend that we not do that, because I think it could confuse the departments if they're brought in front of the committee before first quarter 2024 is finished.
Sure, I would clarify my request. I was asking for the commission and OMB to look ahead to what departments we might want to, what our process might look like, not to bring the departments in, but to start looking. Are we doing department assignments? Do we want to ask the departments to come in later in the year, but kind of to line out our work plan for Q3, Q4 was what I was asking. Definitely not to bring in them so early, but thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for being here, and both of you, Andy and Ross, thank you. And do we have anything else before we adjourn? We've gone quite a bit over today. All right. Do I have a motion?
This is Carmela, so moved.
And second.
This is Brian, I'll second.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for hanging in there today too.
Thank you all. Thanks again, Mark, for
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I don't phrase my questions. So really what I was trying to get to is, with this